Hello, world singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is Cosmere Conversations.
Welcome to the year of Sanderson as it begins on Cosmere Conversations.
We are breaking down the first of the secret projects, Tress of the Emerald Sea. What a joy it has been we have already talked about this. We were kind of taken aback. We were surprised by how quickly the year of Sanderson came upon us. It was the holiday season and then boom, emails.
I knew that it was, starting in 2023. I did not expect to be able to get the first book literally on January 1st. So that was a surprise, especially so soon after The Lost Metal. So it has just been a couple of months of full Cosmere deep diving wonderfulness. I am truly so excited to talk about this book. I've been waiting a long time because I finished well before you did. So I've had no one to talk to about this wonderful story.
It's always lovely to get those motivational glances from you of just why are you doing anything else than reading? Why aren't you done reading?
Yeah.
We need to have a conversation about this. And we're finally here. We're ready for it. Tress of the Emerald Sea. Some of you may have seen our latest unboxing video. That was for the Hoyd box. Separately, there will be a unboxing video for the Tress and Emerald Sea hard copy.
And holy moly, I cannot wait to get that book.
Let's actually start there. Just the beauty of the book,
gosh.
The artwork.
Yeah, the book is absolutely gorgeous. And I haven't even seen the hard copy yet, but even just on my Kindle, the details, the images are absolutely stunning, especially not on my actual Kindle device, but in the Kindle app where there's color.
Yes.
It's absolutely stunning. The photos of the hard copy book that are up on Dragonsteel are incredible. I am in awe, and I don't even have the book in my hands yet.
So you can look forward to another unboxing video and probably 3 to 5 of these book club episodes where we're going to be breaking down Tress of the Emerald Sea, and we're going to be giving our first impressions, our hot takes, our cold takes, if we had any, our glimpse into this new world and a character that I already feel is a classic Cosmere character. Oh, a CCC, a classic Cosmere character in Tress. We had mentioned about the Cosmere draft. Tress would make a great wild card and or party leader. I'd take her anywhere.
Oh, totally. Yeah, either one of those roles I think she would excel in. Let's give a little bit of background on this story. This is a novel-length Hoyd story, so similar to Fleet and the Wandersail or The Dog and the Dragon, but full novel length. And here's a quote directly from Brandon. Quote, "Yes, he's telling the story in-world to someone. You might be able to pick up some of the context of who he's talking to, but it's not meant to be explicitly obvious. You don't need to stress about that as it's not relevant to the story. Just know that this isn't written to you. You don't exist in the Cosmere, but is instead meant to be him telling the story to someone in the Cosmere listening." End quote.
And while Hoyd as a storyteller can definitely embellish and take some liberties with the narrative, Brandon has made clear this story is 100% canon, it is real, and it is not merely a figment of Hoyd's imagination.
It's not just a fable or something that Hoyd has made up. This really did happen somewhere in the Cosmere.
Now, I just want to make sure that everyone is super clear that we are going to spoil the entirety of Tress of the Emerald Sea and everything else.
Spoilers all the time.
Let's just get it out of the way right now. My best guess for who the audience of Hoyd is in this story are some group of people, more than one, on First of the Sun, long in the future, when they are dealing with the arrival of off-worlders, outsiders, and there's a specific line towards the end of the book around the sorcerer reveal that, along with some other hints, points me in that direction. But I think this is being told to a group of people on First of the Sun.
Do you have that quote for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I can read that for us now. And again, hashtag all spoilers. We're going to the end of the book, bringing it to the front of the podcast. Yeah. That's how we roll here. So as we're talking about, Hoyd is the narrator of this story. This is when the sorcerer and Tress are meeting for the first time. And we get this quote, "The sorceress turned and walked toward her desk. Well, child, I don't need your technology, but I find you intriguing. Cecilo, please open the bridge's holding chamber."
"As you wish," a monotone voice said. "It was the spirit that inhabited this place, you see, obeying the will of its owner. Yes, like the speaking minds inhabiting the ships you've seen landing on your planet." End quote. Wow, I'm so glad you picked that out.
And that's just one of the many things that Hoyd drops, not as part of the main story, but to the audience of the story that give us hints pointing towards First of the Sun. Some group of people, I don't know if it's an important group, if it's someone we know, if it is related to other future glimpses of the Cosmere, but that's kind of who I think based on that line of text explicitly.
I'm really glad you called that out. Good cat.
That's what we're here for on Cosmere Conversation. So now you have that information. You can go out and just drop that into casual conversation that I know all y'all are having.
Just casual Cosmere conversations.
As one does. But this is not casual. This is real serious.
Yeah.
So let's continue to just kind of talk about the background. Let's go to a more normal place of beginnings for a podcast episode, because Brandon also stated that writing this book was quite an endeavor unto itself, that he was inspired by, maybe in a different way, but a more like normal way that you hear of authors being inspired. This was inspired by his wife, Emily, and their love of The Princess Bride.
Specifically, the first time that they watched The Princess Bride with their kids, and it had been a while since they had seen it, and they really enjoyed it. And then afterwards, they were talking, and they both had the same takeaway, which is that even though that movie, that story is titled The Princess Bride, the eponymous character doesn't do very much. She's like pretty useless.
Princess Buttercup, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so his idea with this story was to do something similar, but to have the eponymous female character be more useful and more active. And I think that he did a perfect job, basically.
He did a perfect job in creating a character that we love and want to follow and want to root for. And he also did a perfect job at capturing something that is similar in The Princess Bride.
Totally.
Both the famous movie as well as the book that it's based on. There is an element of that story because most people are familiar with the movie, I'm just going to go with that telling. But the story is being told to the young boy, and there's those like quick breaks in the story when it snaps back, and the boy is like, say, "Oh, ew, he kissed a girl," or something like that. And then there's a quick
commentary.
Yes, little commentary. And the breaking kind of the fourth wall within the Princess Bride world to get you back to the storytelling world is, of course, then broken again because we are the viewer experiencing both of these stories, one with the grandfather telling his grandson a story and the story itself. So too is the same in Tress and the Emerald Sea. And I feel that so much because Brandon seemed to be having fun with it, playing with those boundaries of the reader and author and character relationship and kind of the way that those all interact in a very personal way. Everyone has their own experience of a story. And so then when you start to push on the edges and play with the edges, it becomes really fun because it's happening within your own mind, but you know that it's happening in Brandon's mind too. And therefore it's also kind of happening in Hoyd's mind because he's the mechanism that this is all happening. And I love that type of storytelling. It made me love this book and get attached to this book very quickly.
Yeah.
And it makes it feel, to me, more classic in a way.
Totally. Yeah. He really achieves that classic fairy tale feel without it being, cliches. And there's a lightness, a joy that comes through in this sort of whimsical narrative style that is really refreshing and fun to read. It's quite different from really anything else that we've read by him. And I think it is really clear that he enjoyed writing it, that he was really just writing for pleasure. And that in turn makes it really pleasurable to read, which in my opinion is the complete opposite from The Lost Metal, which I think, and Brandon has spoken to the fact that writing the final book in a series is always the hardest because he is constrained by all of the plot points that have come before.
Yeah, I think there's some other authors who have echoed that sentiment, is that it actually gets more complicated.
It just gets harder and harder as you go along.
Including with our last book club and Brent Weeks, the Lightbringer series.
Oh, yeah. He basically said the same thing of like, I sort of wrote myself into a corner and like trying to get out of it would have been too much work basically for it to be worth it.
And with this story, Brandon actually went the extra mile, removing it from his normal workflow and process. He said that he first told Emily, his wife, about this story more than 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And wrote it slowly over all that time as kind of just a love letter or a storytelling.
It was just for her. He was like literally just trying to make his wife happy.
And it did not exist even within the same probably like a Dropbox or Google Drive folders.
Oh,
so
yeah, he
his
said
team
he
couldn't
hid
see
it from everyone.
Yes, so nobody knew that this project was being worked on, though, seemingly with his progress charts and the constant updates, his team's normally well aware of like, what is Brandon doing right now? Oh, he's probably writing this book.
Yeah.
And he never had that with Tress of the Emerald Sea. And it just kind of flows more organically. I don't want to do too much of the criticism and comparison directly to The Lost Metal, but like this is the difference that is just on display. 2 books released back to back from the same author within months of each other. And they actually serve one another very well as complements in the things that they're portraying. I don't want to dive into this too much right now because we're just in the introduction and we're still like too excited. But it's really interesting to have The Lost Metal as a comparison. But let's try to focus in as much as we can just on Tress itself.
Yeah, sure. I think this is a great description of the story from Brandon. Quote, a tale of pirates, dangerous spores, and, because Hoyd is involved, occasional self-important monologues. End quote. Of course, this world is a world of spores, specifically aether spores. So it was really cool to get to see aethers now canon in the Cosmere, even though this is sort of a weird example of them.
Sure.
But it definitely brought me back to reading Aether of Night. And there are some interesting changes and like adaptations and similarities from that I thought were really interesting. Aether of Night was originally abandoned by Brandon because he felt that the combination of like a Shakespearean type style and the utter annihilation of the planet were just too at odds. And I really felt like this book, Tress, retains some of those Shakespearean influences, but in a way that make a little bit more sense, sort of combined with the fairy tale influence as well. It reminded me a little bit of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night with like the ocean. There's not a shipwreck exactly, but there's like trouble on the ocean and mistaken identities and a lone female character in disguise, like making her way in the world. So I thought that was cool.
I certainly think there's a lot of classical influences on this work. The story is not abundantly complicated.
Yes.
But the way that it's told, and again with that fourth wall breaking ability of Hoyd, I think that the simple storyline is aided by everything else. Everything is working in concert together.
Totally.
And that's what makes this book so enjoyable, is we don't need necessarily the deep exploration into the mental psyche of a wounded soldier and post-traumatic stress all the time.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the story world and the story that's being told isn't supporting telling that specific version. And that is why I really appreciate what Brandon was able to do here. And it, in many respects, just like made me enjoy and be excited about reading in a way that I hadn't necessarily felt.
Yeah.
I think the biggest comparison to me, while The Princess Bride is Brandon's stated inspiration, I felt a lot of Lemony Snicket in Brandon's writing. And it really just like made me remember, because that series really launched the idea of an author can play around with the reader.
Totally.
And he can bend the reality of the
like
world.
Flexibility of the writing medium and the different ways that you can tell a story. It doesn't have to be as straightforward as we often see it. To me, it reminded me a little bit of like Good Omens, like Terry Pratchett,
yes,
Neil
100%.
Gaiman vibes that have those self-aware commentary points and whimsy, and they're playing with a lot of traditional tropes, but turning them in a way that is unique and different. And I think this book is so perfect for what it is and what it's going to be. We're going to get this beautiful hardcover, like keepsake book of a story that is extremely classic.
Yeah.
That's going to last forever, that we can totally give to children or nieces and nephews, and they can enjoy the story, right? It stands on its own so well and is completely enjoyable. And then, of course, if you're a Cosmere person, it's also really exciting from a Cosmere perspective. So I love that it does both at the same time.
I have 100% agreement. However, if there are some little kiddos who are reading the hard copy version of Tress, I'm going to make sure that they have gloves on, a poncho, and then they can slowly go through with my approval.
They'll have to check it out, sign their name, leave their favorite toy in exchange, and then check it back in when they're done reading.
I would be very serious about the gloves thing. Be like, I'm not letting you put your dirty paws.
Your jammy hands.
We didn't even have PB&J today. Where did the jam come from?
There's like cracker crumbs in the spine. You're like, Howard Lyon's beautiful artwork is now covered in Cheez-It crumbs.
You're triggering me. I didn't realize we'd have to put a trigger warning on this episode. But if the slow decay of books by grimy, jammy hands triggers you, this is not the episode for you.
You are a like novel purist. You like physical books to stay really nice. I am like,
You're a user of books.
Yeah, I want them to be like dog-eared and well-loved.
I switched to Kindle almost as soon as a Kindle existed because I had such a love of books, the physical medium, and a hatred of like reading the actual book.
Yeah.
Of course, I've read all my books, but like I do feel bad, like opening them up and like bending their backs. Oh, like cracking. No,
that's like the first thing I do is crack it.
I know you go like a chiropractor, just snapping that spine.
The books are there to serve me, not the other way around.
I totally understand that. Tress collects cups. You and I collect books, and we just have a slightly different way of treating them. But no, I will note that our hard copies do not get treated like that. There's no dog ears going on of the collector's editions. And I just treat all books like collector's editions.
You do. The only other thing that I want to note here at the top, because it kind of didn't fit anywhere else, we know that off-worlders to Tress's world call the planet Lumar. And Hoyd says that's a pretty good translation of the name of the planet. And then I'll also note that the language that Tress speaks is Clissian. So we don't really know how those two things are connected. I don't know if Clissian is a language spoken all over the planet or maybe only in her particular country or province, etc. But there are those two details just for our knowledge to toss away in the old memory bank.
Well, we've been talking about our first impressions of Tress. Are there any other ideas or kind of things that you wanted to talk about right now that we're just really important or real standouts of the novel?
I think one interesting thing for me was being able to feel the time period during which this book was being written in the writing of the book, namely the COVID pandemic, like the early days of the pandemic. There were just some themes and some images that ran throughout the book that really were a clue to the things that Brandon was thinking about, the world that he was living in at the time of writing this. I'm thinking of the point where Tress leaves the ship and she pulls her shirt up over her face or over her mouth to protect herself from the spores. Just the idea, right, of being in a world where there are little particles in the air that can destroy you at any moment, that you're
sometimes
afraid
in a
of breathing
violent
in.
fashion.
Yep. And then a lot of themes around sort of people who are foreign to you, people who are different from you, trying to have empathy for those different people. Also around memory and moving forward and how we process memory, how we think about progress and like habits and things like that.
To me, one of the big standouts of Tress and the Emerald Sea is how the connections to the greater Cosmere were done so seamlessly and so meaningfully. Without detracting from the story or entering into what I'll call like the lost metal zone. If you're bringing in a Cosmere connection that's really meaningful, Autonomy attacking Scadrial, then it almost demands a lot of focus and backstory on why Autonomy, how Autonomy, the questions about Autonomy, which isn't really the point of the lost metal. But it's like the more you insert an aspect of the Cosmere into the story, the more time that requires us as readers to like spend with that. It's a little bit what we've seen with the Stormlight Archive and Odium, and Brandon did a brilliant switcheroo there, where as he was introducing Odium, bringing Odium more into the fold, setting up Odium as this great evil in the Stormlight Archive, and then whoopsie-daisy reversing and putting a character that we had just spent, since the very first book, more time with, Taravangian, into the Odium role. It was like, Odium's bad, Odium's bad, Odium's bad. Who is Odium? What is Odium? It's this character that you've already met, and you already know, and you already are maybe aware of how dangerous they can be in Taravangian, and then that becomes the new Odium. It's like backfilling a bunch of this work that you now don't have to do in book 5. You know, that can all be cleanly explained and summarized of just like, it's Teravodium. It's the worst of both of them, or however he wants to go about it.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk a lot about the differences there. Just the fact that the Stormlight Archive has been planned for a really long time, and the entire Mistborn Era 2 was not planned, happened by accident, and so Autonomy wasn't introduced until very late, etc., etc. It was wild to read these two books back to back and see the differences in them. To me, one of them is like what not to do, and one of them is like, this is the perfect thing. It was because I think Tress of the Emerald Sea has just as many super important, super interesting, informative Cosmere connection moments that are done just astronomically better than the last metal.
Right. I mean, in both, the villain, or the true villain of the story, is a superpowered individual from another planet. An Elantrian in Tress's case, in the form of the sorceress, and Autonomy for Wax and Wayne. I think that there is so much great information, so much great Cosmere information in Tress, that it's an essential Cosmere story and will really help us understand Aethers going forward.
But it's also just a part of the story. You don't feel like you're just sitting down to read, 2 pages of Brandon explaining the way the Cosmere works to you.
Yeah, that's actually what I think is the most important, is that the way Cosmere connections are made in Tress is through asides, brief 1-sentence or 2-sentence lines that point in another direction, but don't get us bogged down in having to go and explore that direction. Let me give 2 brief examples of what I'm talking about. In regards to the device that Fort uses to communicate, the narrator, who is Hoyd, says, quote, "That wizard from the stars wasn't me, by the way. I've always wondered who traded that device to Fort. That's Nalthian tech with awakened predictive connection circuits." End quote. And, quote, "Tales of people like Lin Ji who tried to sail around the world with no AVR." End quote. 2 lines from different parts of the story, each providing one or more Cosmere connections, pointing us in a direction, letting us know, like, oh, that device that Ford is using is not of this world. It's got a whole bunch of other stuff going on.
Right. That tells us a whole bunch about what's going on Nalthis, what's possible now, like opens a whole can of worms about Cosmere things, but it's done in a way that is not distracting from the main story.
That's the most important thing, is that because they're quick asides, it doesn't distract. It only enhances, it only makes me interested as a reader, but then I'm right back into the story with Tress, right back into this world, and focused on this story, which, because of its kind of classic nature and simple nature, is really easy to do as a reader. So just all the thumbs up, all possible stars, fantastic love of Tress and the Emerald Sea.
Was there anything in particular that was like your favorite thing about this book?
To me, the most interesting thing that Tress was able to pull off was the reveal of a rather ho-hum Elantrian as the sorcerer and villain of the story. I was expecting, I guess, more of a dive into this world and some, like, I don't know, spore creator type of thing.
Totally. I was like 100% in the story, in the world, in this fantasy fairy tale universe, not thinking about potential Elantrian at all. And so the reveal
Elantrian
was like
with the
so
spaceship.
fun. That was my biggest thing, was like, holy crap, this is our first on-page Cosmere spaceship.
It's right there. There's a bunch of detail about the spaceship itself and like the existence or what it is, and potentially how the magic is working via the spaceship. I feel like the spaceship is an integral part of maybe like tricking the aeonic power, the Aeon door, of where it is, in the same way that the box around the Seon allows a microphone. The ship, I think, allows to trick the magic to thinking that they can use it.
Yeah.
So I, for example, I don't know if the sorceress can leave her ship and remain an Elantrian or remain fully an Elantrian. I think that part of the concept of curses that is on display is people come to them and then leave with a curse. Not that she's going around the world like conquering places and cursing everyone who is her victim. It's just, if you happen to stumble into her Cave of Wonders, her magic ship, then she's the fully powered Elantrian who can mess with your head.
Totally. Did you have any rough cuts for this story?
I honestly don't think so. I honestly don't think that there was something that stood out as just like, oh, this is bad. Or there wasn't, a chapter, a concept that I wasn't vibing with as I was reading the story. We are often like overly critical because we're looking with such a fine eye.
I wouldn't say we're overly critical because we're such huge fans. But usually there's like at least something that we can kind of be like, this wasn't the best.
What's that for you? Is there something like that for you?
Literally nothing.
Nothing at all.
No, I love literally everything about this book. It's perfect and I love it.
And that's how good it is. It just like doesn't have, there's no reason to find any fault with it. It's just like a great Cosmere story, a great character exploration, a great fantasy tale. It knocks it out of the park. I said it before, say it again. All the thumbs up. Just like love Tress.
100%. Shall we dive into the story proper?
Absolutely. We have been just jumping from place to place. Let's focus in. Tell me about Tress, the main character of our story.
Tress is wonderful. She is, I would say, what we know by now as a pretty typical Sanderson heroine. She's a young, naive girl. She leaves home for the first time, finds out that she's stronger than she thought, a la Serene, Shallan, Vivenna, Ciri. So this is a pretty well-trodden trope for a Sanderson story. That's maybe my only complaint. I don't really mind it, but it may be nice at some point to see Brandon maybe break out from that specific female trope. I will say that at least in this book, Tress makes some female friends, so that's refreshing.
It's always good to have friends, and her closest friend is certainly Charlie, who develops in the first, few pages into her clear love interest and crush. Charlie is the, prince.
Well, he's like a nobleman's son, I think.
Yeah, he's got some royal lineage attached to him. Of course, he is pretending to not have a royal lineage.
And doing a terrible job of pretending
he's
to be a gardener.
He's the worst liar ever.
I love that Tress is just like, obviously, you are not a gardener, but I will keep playing along.
One of the great aspects of Charlie's character is that he is motivated by love kind of in all of those interactions, in every interaction that we see, because the reason he's pretending to be a gardener is because princes cannot hang out with a person of Tress's station, a window washer like herself, and therefore pretending to be the gardener is a way to hang out with Tress.
Yeah.
And on a journey of leaving the island, he is traded away, given away. The sorceress gets him, launching Tress's story of rescue. And I feel like I wasn't ready for this kind of world-opening maneuver. I suppose I was kind of expecting to stay a lot more local for more time.
We were just going to stay on Diggins Point.
Like Diggins Point. Or do you remember that movie Moonrise Kingdom? It was kind of a Wes Anderson tale of a kid growing up, but it was happening on an island, and everything and everyone existed on this island, and it was kind of a microcosm story being told that was hinting at bigger themes of like love and betrayal and loss and what you do when you're isolated and the friends you make along the way, all that type of stuff. I thought we were going to get more of a story of like that we were going to go to a very, very isolated world with Tress and kind of really dive into the characters there. And you would kind of realize her small, tiny life was actually very meaningful. And instead it just became a whole look at multiple versions of these spore seas, and we're traveling across their world, we're learning so much, we're being exposed to so much, and it was just like a whirlwind that I wasn't ready for. But I think that starting with that simple relationship between Charlie and Tress is what makes everything else okay, because you're just like on the journey with her and you want her and Charlie to reunite, but you also know that like a bunch of other stuff is happening too. Tress is growing and changing and she's meeting new people. It's just all a wonderful way of setting up the story.
Did you expect Huck to be Charlie?
The rat reveal, as we shall call it. I believe that there was a couple of hints that pointed in that direction. Never had a single moment of just, that rat is definitely Charlie. What about you? Did that come as a surprise?
Yeah, it did not occur to me literally at all. I saw some people online saying like, oh, I called that, pretty early on in the story. I knew it was so obvious. When I read, I like completely suspend disbelief. I'm like fully in the world. I'm so gullible. Like you can tell me anything and I'm just like, yes, pretty story.
Yeah, there's an element of that. I also saw some of those comments. I think one, and I might be getting the word incorrect, but they said, oh, I knew it because Huck was described as loquacious. And in the second chapter, Charlie was also described as loquacious.
Oh, gosh.
And therefore, they had to be the same person. And it might not have been the word loquacious, but it was
something like that.
It was a word that stood out and would stand out if you had that type of eye. It is a strange eye to develop, but I certainly know that people like that type of figuring out the story that way. Like a tinkerer pulling apart all the gears and like figuring out, oh, this here means that it's likely to reappear down the road there. And if it does, that means that there's a connection between these two. Like, I understand some of the joy there. And I want to say that one of the great things Brandon has done with this story is a lot of foreshadowing, a lot of little hints, both to the Huck reveal, but also just about the story itself, the journey that Tress is going on, and the themes of empathy paying off over time, and the relationships that you build, putting effort into those, will come back around, kind of like a karmic balance. And we see that so often with Tress and the crew. So let's dive into the crew. Let's talk about them more specifically.
Well, first, let's just get the exciting one out of the way. Captain Crow.
Captain Crow.
The spore eater. And we're going to talk way more about spores and spore eaters and crows in a subsequent episode. But she's there. And we have, quote, Crow is host to an aggressive strain of the verdant parasite. End quote. Super interesting character.
Yeah, opening up the rabbit hole of discussion on aethers and this specific type of aether, the Luhel bond.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about all of these
things.
There's a
whole episode coming your way.
I think that this relationship, though, is important to take note of and point out, because there are several of these bonds we've now witnessed throughout the Cosmere, with AVR and people like Six of the Dusk, with, of course, the Nahel bond, Spren and the Radiant, now with Crow, who is said to have an aggressive strain. But I would argue that what we saw Tress do and what Tress is becoming and could develop more as, or evolve into a greater version of, is a partnership with the aethers that is more akin to the quote-unquote true aethers of Twin Soul. And
I'm not going to address that because that's a whole separate episode.
That's what I'm saying, though. It allows for these conversations and introduces all of these concepts very well, very seamlessly. And now I just want more of it. I want to know more about Crow. I want to know more about the spores and how they interact and what the aethers are doing. And instead, let's continue to talk about the crew, because we get Fort, who is a giant of a man, reminding me a little bit of Rock, not just because he is the cook of the ship, but also because of the kindness and the camaraderie that Tress, builds her relationship on. Kaladin and Rock kind of form the foundation of Bridge 4, and so too Tress and Fort are like the beginnings of the crew made anew under Tress.
Yeah, he's got a really approachable vibe, despite the fact that he is like always trying to trade with people, and that is his like culture's version of hunting, which is really interesting. The tiny little tidbits that we get of the culture that he comes from and like how it's changed over time, how that presents in Fort himself, is really interesting. That's another place where it's like, man, we could have so many spin-off stories on this world exploring all of these different cultures and places.
And our narrator has this to say, quote, Fort was 100% human, plus at least 20% of something else I haven't been able to determine, end quote.
Which is very interesting.
That right there is pointing maybe to, at least to me, a lot of possible shenanigans, we'll say, going on Lumar for his entire people. Like this hunter-trader group of people, I would say, may be like the Horn Eaters, slightly more open to some bonds or some shenanigans.
Well, because we know the Horn Eaters are descended from like Parshendi human hybrids.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
Maybe there's something going on there. Fort claims to have been to 10 seas prior to meeting Tress, which
out of 12.
Which means that by the end of the story, he would have visited all 12 seas.
Wow, well done, Fort. Congrats.
Yeah, Fort, the only person we know of that has been to all 12 seas.
Yeah.
The hunter and trading culture that you mentioned was, again, similar in many ways to the Horn Eaters, with the kind of hierarchy that they placed. They, the hunters go out, kill the thing, but of course you can't have a society all of hunters. And so they like slightly shifted the meaning of what it means to hunt. And for Fort, that means to seek a good trade, reminding me of Arisen and her master and that relationship.
Totally. And then, of course, Fort is the owner of that super cool translation device that apparently comes from Nalthis and is wild because Fort is deaf and he is able to communicate with others via this amazing device.
Technology, seemingly, that later, when it's in possession of the sorceress, Hoyd straight up just calls a laptop.
Yeah.
And the development of that technology mixed with the Elantrian magic system leaves a lot of questions that we're going to get to down the road when we explore that in more detail. But there is some type of iPad-esque device that Fort is using. It allows him to type his thoughts out, and then eventually he gets a more advanced one that can type on the fly, continue typing.
Yeah, and it has like predictive text, basically, like we do in a text message. If we type "I love," it will suggest words that we may say afterwards, so it makes it quicker for him as well.
And I know that Brandon did have several revisions regarding the character of Fort, bringing in a deaf author or someone who gave a review of kind of how Fort was portrayed, and they put a lot of focus on that character representation and what it would be like. I think that probably the most emotional, or one of the most emotional moments for me during the book was when
the device breaks.
Captain Crow smashes his first laptop device.
Yeah.
And I, had a physical reaction more so to anything else in the book of just like what that must have and did mean to Fort. And then because Crow knew Fort and was part of the crew, like she knew what she was doing as well.
Yeah.
And it was just hitting like on all the levels that you wanted to, which I think was a perfect example of like what Brandon was trying to accomplish and successfully accomplished in this story.
Yeah. Our next member of the crew is Anne, who is very funny. She is the character who loves firearms, but she is a terrible shot. And I love the quote where Hoyd says that she has such terrible aim that letting her take a shot is the craziest thing he's ever heard. And, quote, "I was literally part of a secret plot to kill God," end quote.
After visiting the dragon and exchanging Crow for 3 small boons, one of the boons that Tress gets are bifocals or just
I think just
glasses,
eyeglasses, yeah,
for Anne, and the 2-part setup, Fort being deaf and Anne functionally being blind.
Yeah.
Is a great like 1-2, one that was very obvious, and that was like played as a joke. I didn't recognize what was being told to me until that moment of like, oh, she needs glasses. She's like seeing things shifted in her vision because her vision itself is askew. It's not like just a funny thing that's happening. She believes she's aiming correctly at the thing that she sees.
And like how frustrating it must be to go through life with that kind of disability, really, that you kind of get blamed for, you know, of just being like clumsy or dumb or whatever. And it's like, no, she needs help. Like, she needs a medical device.
There are so many situations like that it's easy to take for granted in our modern world. I think that eyeglasses is a really ubiquitous example now, where, of course, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years, 10,000 years ago, ain't nobody have any glasses.
Yeah.
But there's probably people who had messed up vision.
Yeah, and if you don't have the knowledge, like you truly don't know, right? Because I can't see through your eyes. I remember when I was young and I got glasses for the first time, or got contact lenses for the first time. I remember looking at the world around me and just thinking, oh my God, this is how you're supposed to see?
You're Jasmine on the carpet.
I had no idea. Like, I didn't necessarily feel like my quality of life was bad or anything like that. I felt like I was doing fine, but I was not, let me tell you.
Absolutely needed those glasses.
Yes. I did not know you were supposed to be able to see the individual leaves on trees. I thought they were just, you know, green clouds like they are when you draw them. Like, yeah, that makes sense.
So Anne and you have the same vision problems.
Basically.
Each corrected by lenses. And her enthusiasm for firearms, her enthusiasm for learning how to use the cannons aboard is what bonds her and Tress, because of course Tress trains with Anne and they like share that moment together. So when you're talking about a female having a female friend, like, this is the moment. Tress and Anne become friends because Anne has an issue, a problem, a weakness and an insecurity, and Tress has empathy for that and recognizes that.
And Anne's obvious passion and, as you said, enthusiasm is so palpable. It draws you to her, even though in the beginning it's kind of quirky, and it's really heartwarming to see Tress be the one who gives her a shot, who sees that enthusiasm and passion. And even though it might be the craziest idea Hoyd's ever heard, you know, Tress encourages her.
Let's talk a little bit about everyone's favorite Scadrian, Ulam.
Yes, Ulam. Wow. Okay, this is another one. Did you clock that he was a Kandra?
Certainly way earlier on. I don't know if it was the first quote that we get a description of him, but he was certainly talking enough about wanting body parts that I was like, oh, a Kandra who loves body parts.
Man, I don't know what it was, but maybe because he was described as looking so weird and not really like a normal human.
Yeah, so
I was completely thrown off.
Here's the first description of him. Quote, he had jet black hair and features that looked too sharp to be real, like he was a painting or a drawing. His skin was an ashen gray, his eyes blood red. If the underworld had legal counsel, it would have been this man, end quote. So certainly not jumping out there as Kandra-like, but I also think that the stark image of him and then yet everyone's seeming comfort around him was like a contrast that made me think of a Kandra. There's fun wordplay for you. I think that there was just an element of this person or this Kandra is choosing an image that they want in the same way that the Kandra sometimes choose like the weird bodies, the true bodies.
And we'll talk more about this in a later episode. We do get clues as to what has been going on with the Kandra and why he is looking different than we've seen Kandra before. Mm-hmm. But it sufficiently threw me off. Like, I thought Kandra, and then I was like, maybe like Koloss of some type, or Sleepless, or like every time he was on screen, I just could not figure out what he was.
So I think that the introduction of Ulam's character and this like counterpoint to the kind of nice people we're meeting aboard Anne and Fort and even Soleil is then contrasted with this thing that we maybe are supposed to be afraid of. Like, he feels closer to Captain Crow than another one of the characters. He's not that bad or evil.
No, but he does have like a weird edge where he's just a little weird. I think the interesting and most important thing to note about Ulam is that he is sort of, a friend of Hoyd's, and that is why he's here. Like, he came to check on Hoyd, basically.
And Hoyd will say that Ulam is legitimately the best doctor he has ever seen. Striking in that it's a big Cosmere. Hoyd's been around for a long time. There are people, for example, on Rashar that can magically heal people flattened by boulders. But Ulam has, a deeper skill, maybe the skill of a surgeon, the skill kind of that transcends merely magical healing.
Well, I'm very curious about the potions that he provides at different times to heal people, and like what's going on with his doctor skills. And then last named member of our crew, Soleil, the helmswoman, is on a journey looking for her father, and Tress also gets to bond with her, and they sort of encourage each other and have a really nice relationship. And she does find her father in the end, which is nice.
Yeah, I think that it's Soleil who is the one who will say, in a single day, you completely changed my mindset or the way that I viewed the world and what was possible by, giving me the thing that I had always wanted and had kind of convinced myself I was never going to get, which is the knowledge of where her father was. There's a lot with Soleil specifically that I loved as the helmswoman. There were even a couple of mentions in the text about how our knowledge of a helmswoman, or what happens on our planet, which is not Earth, but is the audience's planet, who I think is the people of the First of the Sun, who are shipbuilders.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of sailing. They kind of got like
they
the archipelago.
Live on an archipelago.
Yeah,
so
a lot of sailing. And that kind of contrast of, you may be familiar with how things work here, but Soleil's position was really unique. And I loved seeing that in moments of trial or stress from a ship perspective, when there's high spore seas or a storm, even the captain is taking orders from Soleil and is, grabbing ropes and tying things off as Soleil orders. And it's just a cool position that she serves for the ship and for the crew. And then, of course, is one of the main reasons that Tress becomes captain of the ship for the final moments of the story.
And then the rest of the crew, the Dougs.
Oh, the Dougs. The Dougs is probably, to me, another one of these examples of, wow, Brandon, you did something amazing here, like truly amazing. Because I think that we might have to officially nickname everyone who's a Cosmere fan as a Doug.
Oh, goodness.
You go to a convention.
We have to change our intro.
Yeah.
Hello, Dougs.
Maybe that'll be a patron-specific joke. Just, hello, Dougs.
Because they're on the crew.
Of course.
Yeah.
Y'all are
the Cosmere Conversations crew.
Of Dougs. Now, what Brandon was able to do with the Dougs was introduce this idea of, there were a bunch of other people on the ship too, but I've forgotten their name. We'll just call them collectively the Dougs. Only to then return at the end of the story, when we follow this character of Tress giving empathy to the main people around that we just went over. And then, of course, expanding that to, I said I didn't remember the name of the Dougs, but I actually knew all of them, because all of them are important and unique, and all of them have their own life stories. Yeah. And each of them has their own name that Tress knows, and was having conversations with those individuals, the Dougs, that we didn't see, but still paid off at the end of the story, or like post Captain Crow moment. And you get introduced to the individual Dougs as Tress's role becomes more center stage. When they're under Crow, they're just all Dougs. But when Tress becomes the captain, that's when everyone starts opening up, and we as the readers start to learn about the Dougs as well.
And then, of course, last but certainly not least, Hoyd is a full character in our story for once, looking very different than we have seen him previously.
Yeah, afflicted, certainly.
Yes. Yes. Does not have his wit as we are used to seeing him.
He is cursed by the sorceress, and what we find out is a bet between the two of them, kind of like two powerful entities facing off, and Lumar and the Emerald Sea just happens to be the setting of these two, Cosmere-aware individuals facing off. Hoyd is interested in taking all of the power from the sorceress. I don't know if he straight up wants to murder her. And Hoyd certainly seems to have an inkling or an urge to want the Seon that controls the ship, or just to become a fully powered Elantrian and, get the Seon as a bonus, as a little side result. But we get this, quote, "To her, the woman looked deific. It was the glowing skin. Really helps you land a good first impression. I've been envious of that look for centuries now, and have been aiming to adopt it. In fact, that is what this has all been about. But I get ahead of myself." End quote.
Yeah, so I take from that he wants to be an Elantrian.
Yeah, he wants to be an Elantrian. I don't know if it's a direct theft that Rena possesses, if it's theft of Rena's power, or if it's he wants access to the internet that gets him into the Elantrian archives type of thing.
Well, I think we've seen him, going around the Cosmere collecting different types of investiture, and up until this point he has not had Elantrian powers. And so what he wants is he wants Rena to do some Aeon Door, draw her lines in the air, and turn him into an Elantrian. I don't think that takes anything away from her. She just has the power to do it. And then because she has all bargaining power, she's like, okay, but you have to be cursed first. And this is the only way that I'll turn you into an Elantrian. But we're going to do an entire episode on Hoyd.
Yeah, definitely lots to talk about, and the bet specifically and the ramifications, because we do, or at least I think this is far in the future from Stormlight Archive, where we are kind of currently located in the timeline of the Cosmere. So I don't know if it's going to have a direct impact. For example, I don't think Hoyd's going to show up in Stormlight 5 and be an Elantrian.
Right.
And so this might just be a little bit of fun speculation for the far future. What about some favorite quotes from the story to kind of wrap us up with this intro episode to the book club? Tell me about moments that stood out from you from Tress of the Emerald Sea.
I have so many. I highlighted so much of this book. There was so much wonderful prose. I think that in particular, because of the style of the book, because it's told from Hoyd's perspective, we get a little bit more of that authorial commentary, which was really beautiful and just had some really lovely moments. So I have a lot of favorite quotes. I'll start with this one. Quote, "Worries are the only thing you can make heavier simply by thinking about them." End quote. As a chronic warrior, that is true.
Fun facts.
Yeah.
That are not fun.
There's also some really fun moments like this. Quote, "We hunt for bravery, cleverness, heroism, and we find no shortage of such virtues. Legends are silly with them. But the person who is willing to reconsider their assumptions, the hero who can sit down and reevaluate their life, well, now that is a gemstone that truly glitters, friend. I would trade 12 Lingies for one person who is willing to sit down for a single blasted minute and think about what they're doing. Do you know how many wars could have been prevented if just one person in charge had stopped to think, maybe we should double check. Perhaps blinking twice isn't an insult in their culture. I'm drowning in bravery, cleverness, and heroism. Instead, kindly give me a little common sense." End quote.
Yeah, I think the last bit of that, kindly give me a little common sense, should be tattooed on many people's. And the poetry of much of the writing here is kind of on point. And I'm so glad that Hoyd, as the narrator, allows for that kind of fun poetry.
Totally. How about you? Favorite quotes?
I agree. There were a lot. And I think that even from the get-go, the opening lines of the book are impactful, imagining what type of story this is going to be and what type of girl.
It pulls you in right away.
But there's also another one from early on that I think is a little bit of a foreshadow report. We have this, quote, "That said, you must understand this is a tale about people who are both what they seem and not what they seem, simultaneously, a story of contradictions. In other words, it is a story about human beings." End quote.
I love that one.
That's a really good line, but also very clearly, everyone in the story is a human being.
Including the rat.
Except on first glance, the rat is the weird one out who's not a human being. But of course, they told us up front, this is a story about human beings. Everyone here is a human being, including the rat.
I don't know if that was intended
It's
to be
all
foreshadowing.
Yes,
but
it's
I like
all
it.
foreshadowing. I think that everything is foreshadowing. No, but it does, point to that concept of being what you seem and not what you seem. Being the scared, naive girl from the small backwater island, and also being the king's mask and sprouter and the brave and capable individual that all the stories are made up of. Like, this is Linji and the great sailor around the world, but it's also Tress. And that's what's so cool about it.
There's another great quote about that sort of theme, quote, "Human beings are like shorelines of continents. The closer you look, the more detail you see, basically into infinity," end quote.
And when you want to toss a little bit of shade at someone, you could recite to them something along the lines of this, quote, "The other girls were obviously right, as they all knew how to be unique. They were so good at it, in fact, that they did it together," end quote. Be like, oh yeah, you and all those people are so unique together.
Very unique. Yep. Doing all the same unique things. As you alluded to earlier, there are some great quotes about empathy, which is a really big theme in this book.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, "It might seem that the person who can feel for others is doomed in life. Isn't one person's pain enough? Why must a person like Tress feel for two or more? Yet I've found that the people who are the happiest are the ones who learn best how to feel," end quote. And then later there's this, quote, "Empathy is an emotional loss leader. It pays for itself eventually," end quote.
To me, probably the book summarized in a single line is right there. Empathy is the emotional loss leader. Tress starts from the place of empathy, and she is rewarded with that paying for itself at the end of the book. I think that is really what Brandon was focusing in on with this tale and with this character.
Yeah, I love that. I love that call.
Overall, we have had a bunch of fun with Tress, and there is a lot more to explore. I feel like every other sentence we were just like, we're going to have an episode about that. We're going to have an episode about that.
I've been so excited. I've taken basically all of our episode notes already.
So we hope that you will join us in the book club, maybe reading or rereading Tress of the Emerald Sea.
Do reach out to us. Let us know all of your thoughts about Tress. And until next time, life before death,
strength before weakness,
journey before destination.